Welcome back to our podcast. And today on our podcast, we have Sharon. Sharon, welcome.
Thank you. Nice being on here. Thank you.
Sharon, when we look at what's happening in the business world, and one of the key factors that we see that organizations, particularly startups and big organizations, need to do as well is to move away from the tried and true and come up with different business models, different approaches, integrate advice from a whole variety of different individuals, best practices, maybe best practices conflict, and try and come up with a new approach, a fresh approach. And we're seeing a lot of that creative process taking place in disruptor companies, companies that are changing their industry by changing the rules of the game. And they're changing business models, using technology to do that. But there's an underlying issue around that, and that is coming up with a methodology or an approach to do that, to be able to integrate various ideas, to have that brainstorming and come up with a new approach, a new way of looking at the problem. If we look at the problem the way other organizations and other individuals do, we're going to come up with the same solution that they do, and that's not going to differentiate us. And you're immersed in that field, and you're looking at how to come up with different solutions to the problems that are out there. What is the kind of methodology or framework that you use to come up with different solutions to different problems?
Well, it all comes down really to people. By bringing diverse thinking into a room, it's amazing what you can come up with. So how we look at looking at different ways of changing the status quo is by bringing people to the table that have not ever been to the table before. Some of those, whether it's diversity of thought, diversity of ethnicity, of gender, what have you, bringing new perspectives really changes the game. And it's not only within an environment like a company, what have you, but more from the perspective of sometimes when you randomly select people that have their backgrounds are completely different from one another, the perspectives are just so unique and so rewarding to hear that you go down paths that you never would have expected to go down. So that's largely the game changer when it comes to making impact in a way that technology can assist. But generally, in the end of the day, it's really human resources, it's people with their thought process and how to really make alternate views on things and not doing the status quo and not going through the regular channels.
Sharon, when we're bringing people together to try and implement the diversity of thought concept, how do we know that the diversity of thought is there? You talked about maybe bringing in what we might refer to as outliers, individuals who are not part of the normal group solving process. If we're solving something in technology, maybe we bring in somebody that has absolutely no experience in that industry. So how do we measure that our group has this diversity of thought? Is there either quantifiable or qualifiable metrics that tell you that the group is diverse in their thinking?
That's a very good question. I don't know about. I think what happens is a lot of it is organic, and it's the not knowing that's really the exciting piece. So can we measure it from the front end? Not entirely, no, because we're mixing up new people all the time. So if you bring three very divergent thought processes into a room, you have no idea what the outcome will be. But what we do see, though, is there is statistics or there is metrics behind the fact that we know that diverse thinking obviously leads to much more innovation and more sort of opportunities down the road for, really getting under the covers of something that you not necessarily would have gone down before. But as I was saying, it's more about it's like a scramble of people coming into a room and being able to, actually, I'm going off topic here. I don't think this is going as well as I thought. Sorry, ask me the question again.
So it's around the metrics of diversity of thought, and how do we know that the group is diverse? I can see bringing in people from different professions. I can see people bringing in people that maybe have different educational or other backgrounds. I could see bringing in people who place priorities different on solutions, or people that have different kinds of methods. Maybe somebody's more algorithmic, somebody's maybe more visual in terms of how they solve the problem. So maybe those are some of the diversity of thought indicators, that you have people that not only the knowledge base that they have is different, but the reasoning process and how they evaluate solutions is different. So it seems to me those three basic metrics would hold.
Yeah, absolutely, most definitely. If people come exactly with those kinds of backgrounds, whether it's sensibilities from the perspective of if we want to talk about gender, so male and female sensibilities come up with different types of viewpoints. Education and background, as you mentioned, those people who may not have had sort of the traditional educational path to those who have. Really provide different types of interesting viewpoints and perspectives. So these are definitely metrics to recognize who we can bring into the mix, for sure. But not only the people as well, but it's also the problem solving. So when we throw people in a room and then throw a problem at it, and then dissecting that problem, for example, in the traditional sense of banks, I'll just give an example. We know banks to be tried and true, kind of stayed in many ways. But right now, in today's world, they're really trying to set themselves apart. In the end of the day, they're commodities, right? So why would we go from one bank to another? And they're trying really hard to create a different set of thought process and how to reach out to people. And what they do is to throw a problem that is completely outside the realm of banking needs. And I say this because I've had a number of conversations with banks around the world, and they're really looking at pulling together, identifying problems that are outside the scope of what we would naturally think to be in a problem-solving company. At any rate, just having a really hard time today.
Sharon.
Yeah.
When I was listening to what you were saying about the banks, and it seems to me that as there's two inhibitors to coming up with a creative solution. One, of course, is the biases that we have. Perhaps somebody is more biased towards a financial or numbers-based solution, and therefore they don't see what's happening on the organizational culture side. And the other one is the assumptions that we have. And that we may have assumptions in the financial industry, for example, around banking, security and privacy and self-service that the customer wants to have. So assumptions and biases, how do we, in a process that you describe, how do we identify assumptions and biases and make sure that they're on the table and then tear them apart so that they're not inhibiting our thinking?
It is always a challenge because I think it's building in a culture that allows you to say these things, to have these biases, put them out there, and not be afraid to present them in a way that others will say, you know what, that actually hits a note with me, and we need to explore that. So it's really building a culture of transparency, building a culture of comfort level where you can include everybody in an inclusive place. That says, nothing should be left on the table. Everything should be on the table that we can dissect and really identify what feels good to the whole room or what feels off. And so that's how you can really peel the onion back, those layers back, and identify what are these biases? Where are we trying? What points are we really trying to hit on?
And when you're talking about peeling back and having that open culture and transparency, there's different ways of getting ideas on the table. One is much more of a brainstorming approach where everybody puts their ideas out, but that tends to be very public in that an individual puts their ideas out and everyone knows who said that. Other ways are more anonymous. There may be approaches in which ideas are pooled together and then worked on, but nobody knows where they came from. So any of that kind of groupthink or bias or organizational issues around who said what are removed. And in the work that you do you tend to find that having that public approach where everyone puts their ideas out and everyone knows who said what is better than the more anonymous approach?
I think it requires both. It's always it is always difficult. There's always somebody who's a louder, more extroverted person to somebody who's more introverted. It takes time to think about these questions and evaluate what they want to say. So there's no question that in a group think, there's always one area, maybe one half that's much more weighted based on their maybe extrovertedness or comfort level with the topic or what have you. But with that, it's important for others who are not as weighted or not, maybe potentially listening more to be able to absorb that and hear it too. On the other side as well, I think it's a mix of both things. You have to try different ways of integrating, different processes. So sometimes anonymous, writing up your thoughts on it, or having a Slack channel that allows you just kind of to watch the conversation and inject when you feel comfortable. So there's different ways that we look at making a comfort cultural place, a place that's comfortable enough for you to integrate in.
It sounds as if you're working in a group environment and trying to bring out that diversity of thought, and you have introverts and extroverts and some people who maybe prefer to be anonymous because of the group tensions. It sounds as if there's a role in there for a facilitator of some kind, or at least a piece of software that manages to make sure that all voices are heard. What are some of the best practices or ideas that you've seen around the facilitation to ensure that that diversity of thought and the constraints that we might have with introversion and extroversion and groupthink and group, in groups and out groups are dissipated and they're not shaping the solution?
You've hit the nail on the head. Absolutely, a facilitator is crucial. There's somebody who's completely unbiased in the way, in as much as you can be unbiased. So what we when we work with in our environment, we use project managers, we call them, and they just basically recognize and pull out what they feel is not being heard at that point, and put their finger on areas where they see gaps. And so they're really kind of gap seekers. It's like when people are talking a lot about one side of a topic, their focus is to say, are we weighted on the other side? Where are these areas that we need to really focus on? So it is a real talent to have that kind of facilitation, and that you have to look for people who really are skilled in that area, and it takes a lot of removing of oneself from it and being able to see holistically who is in front of you, what is the problem. It's the old we say mission man me. So mission meaning, what are we trying to get at? What is our biggest goal? And then let's think about the man meaning the people around us and the culture that can bring us together, and the me being the person, you yourself. Remove yourself from that. You're the last person to actually get the value from. So if you kind of follow those layers, you'll get to what you need to get to in the end, which is hopefully innovation, diversity of thought, and building up a culture that is will flourish very well.
Sounds as if the facilitator, when they remove themselves from the process, they have to remove themselves with the understanding that maybe they're not going to be the most liked person in the group, and they're not in there to be liked. They're in there to try and ensure a solution can come out, because they may, as a facilitator, have to shut down some of the extroverts or people that are monopolizing the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, and I've seen it many times. But what I have seen is, while it gets at times uncomfortable in the conversations, because some people really just like to talk, and others are just quieter, or some have really strong opinions, that the facilitator needs to understand that this is not a contest for popularity. This is about getting the job done. And as long as we remove that ego, a lot can be done from that. And it's not the easiest position to be in. That's why I say it requires really strong skills and a good sense of who you are as a facilitator, and having a strong core to handle some of the backlash that can happen at times. But that's good to have. It's also always good to have strife in just to feel it and to feel that tension, so to know how to then massage it and relax it and recognize what were the steps in order to get through that piece, because nothing is a straight line. There's always going to be bumps along the journey of any company, any entrepreneurship venture, or any venture, to recognize we're all in it together, and it gets messy at times.
When you're talking about strife there, that I can think that there's at least two different kinds. One is personality based, and the other one is idea based, where there's a conflict of ideas occurring. For the personality based, that can be disguised as an idea based one, in which one individual just disagrees with another individual's ideas, and they're always focused on their ideas, but in reality it's really because they're trying to disconnect the individual, so that a personality based one can be disguised as an idea based one. And have you seen, at least from the facilitator point of view, how to recognize when it's an idea conflict versus a personality conflict?
Yeah, I have. That's a very astute question. It does happen, and I think it's human nature to not be forthright in how you feel about somebody. You always want to, mask it with something else. It's not really, deep down, it might be the person's personality that's just rubbing up against them. They don't like the way that they're so forthright or what have you, that they use that example of what they're saying, not who they are or what's underneath there. And the facilitator, from that standpoint, what we've seen is often a redirect, and just to give that space, because recognizing, and it takes again back to the skill of a facilitator to recognize that this might be a personality clash, in which case taking time away or redirecting it to someone else and bringing a third person in helps to balance it out and have that other third person break in to the discussion and give it balance. And so that's what we need to do when we see that kind of personality stripe. It's like, let's not put too much heat. It's like putting oil on it, and just letting it sizzle. We need to relax it and bring another component to it, so that we can so the other two who are in that strife mode can recognize another voice in it. So that's what we've been, and it's a real dance, to be honest. There's no real, one answer, but there are tactics in which to be able to support it.
Sharon, as we come to the end of our podcast, have you got some takeaways for our listeners?
I would say that, in terms of, changing your thought process and doing things differently, is really it's really being able to, as I said earlier, sit back and put yourself last in any conversation. And what I mean by that is, think about what it is that you're trying to do. What is the mission of what's being done? And look around the room of all of the components that are part of it, all those divergent thoughts, and really take the time to listen to it and really impact them by helping their roles as well. And then at the end, the person wins for anything. So I don't know if it's a really takeaway, but just being open and being trustworthy of your own thoughts and being part of a divergent culture and allowing people to speak and listen, it's really valuable and wins in the end.
Thank you, Sharon, for sharing that with us.
Thank you. It's been great.